Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I can't believe this is already the first episode of Misplaced. It feels like time is really flying. I'm really excited about the episode today. So let us just get started. As a reminder, if this is the first time you're tuning in, Misplaced is a series about food systems, about misplacements and issues in the food systems. And we talk with entrepreneurs and with experts about the solutions that are out there and what can we do to better. So we're really, really excited about today's episode. Is one that is very close to our heart. Of course, you might have imagined from the topic. And it's also really cool because we get to team up with our Austrian office. And so today we have invited our own founder and CEO, Katharina Unger. Welcome, Katharina. Hi.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, thanks for joining us. So I'll take the screen for another few seconds just to tell our audience a little bit more about you. Katharina, as I said, is our founder. She's the founder of Livin Studio first and Livin Farms later. And she has really established herself as a leader in insects and novel food innovations. She is a thought leader in the space of design for sustainability, for food, and for agricultural innovation in particular. So in today's episode, Katharina will share her perspective as an entrepreneur, as a designer, and as an innovator. And she will talk to us about how the urban landscape, but also the rural landscape, has been changing and will be transformed by innovation. So without further ado, Katharina, the screen is yours.
Thanks so much, Christina. I'm really happy to be here and share a few updates. Some of you out there might have seen my work already and know a little bit about it and about what we do at Livin Farms. I think it's a great format that Christina and the team has put together to really dig deeper into the food systems and what's behind our story about insects and deeper into the solutions for it. So let me just quickly go into presentation mode. My cursor here. 1 second. Okay, now. Okay, so let me start from the beginning. Some of you might know this character, particularly in the German-speaking world. It's Pumuckl. It's a little cheeky goblin who really, in my family, has become the synonym for eating meat. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story behind it. I grew up in the countryside in a very rural place. And my parents decided to relaunch the mill that my grandfather had founded. And around the mill, there was a lot of space. There is still a lot of space. And so we could utilize that for growing cattle and having a little herd, free range herd around our house because my dad loved to eat meat. So we got the herd when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Shortly after, we had our first calf. We raised them in a really organic, very natural way. So the very first calf that we had, we called it Pumuckl, of course, because my brother and I had this favorite character, Pumuckl, from the TV show. It was a very happy time. We raised this calf, and at some point, a year later, it landed in front of our noses on our plates like this, and we were shocked. We're like, this is Pumuckl. So really, this became a big story in our family because it started for us a conversation around meat, about what it means ethically to eat meat, and also what it means for the environment. So because we raised it organically in a very natural way around our house, within our close proximity, this really became a very deeply ingraining experience for me in my childhood. And when I later ventured out into the world to work as an industrial designer, I oftentimes came across this question again when I went to new places, especially urban places. Where does the food here come from? Like, where is it grown? You know, not all the places where you go are as rural as the place where I came from. So understanding the connections between where food comes from, where it's processed, and where it's eventually eaten, this connection is often gets lost, especially in our everyday lives. And because we sort of lost this connection in many ways, it has a lot of results. It has a lot of results for the food system. So the places where we grow food are typically far away from the places where we consume the food. Especially you know, urban and rural spaces, this interaction between the two is something that is more and more present in our food system, and that creates issues and a lot of waste. So here on the left-hand side, you see pools of large lakes of waste from the agricultural industry, from the pig industry. And on the right-hand side, you know that that's waste that occurs on our plate. And that's what really plays a big topic into what we do at Livin Farms, what I did in my own work as well. So in the future, we have already now, and even going into the future, we see a growing demand of meat, of animal proteins. On the one hand, protein increase, the demand of increase is for people themselves to eat. We have a growing population. And on the other hand, it's also to go into animal production. But at the same time, the land is actually decreasing. So we lost already about 30% of arable land worldwide over the last decade. So we have less and less resources, less and less acreage to actually produce the food that we need. And animal feed is an important factor in that. So that's where insects come in, our allies. They can be a solution for the food system. It is not there is no single solution that will solve everything, but insects is one important key factor that we can use. So there's a short video that shows our mealworms that we grow in our Hive Explorer, for example, eating an apple core. So you know, that's actually already the core idea of why insects can be so crucial and so important, because they can eat food waste, they can process it and make a higher quality end product out of it. And that's exactly where they fit best into the food system. So over the last years, over the last 7 or 8 years, the insect industry has been growing. It really started around 2012, 2013 to really pick up. We see an increasing amount of research in that field. And at the same time, something interesting happened. The plant-based proteins also became a huge market. So on this picture, you see McDonald's actually offering luncheon meat with OmniPork, with a plant-based meat alternative. And for the consumer, the question is, of course, well, how do insects really fit in? Why, if there's plant-based alternatives, why should I be looking into insects? Why are insects interesting and can be beneficial for the food system? But it is exactly about the food waste. So that's really where they can make the biggest impact. It's where we do not have to use resources, again, water, land, to grow plants, but to really use resources that are already existing in our food system to feed to insects, and they can really upcycle it then. So there's about 3.5 million tons of bakery waste, for example, yearly in the European Union. It's only European Union. There's about the same amount of spent grains from distilleries, from breweries. And there's 53 million tons of vegetable and fruit waste per year in the European Union. So while we should, on the one hand, reduce as much waste as we can, that's the first step, there will inevitably always be waste from both from harvest, but also from from processing foods and feeds, as you see on this picture. And that's where insects have their key advantage in eating that up and creating higher value proteins. And those proteins then, and fats, and also fertilizer that come out of insect production can then be applied to novel applications. So on the one hand, on the left-hand side, you see meat alternatives, so really in our everyday food, but probably rarely as the whole insect, the worm that looks you in the eye. No, as an ingredient, so as something that is adding functionality and sustainability to your palate. And on the right-hand side, you see another very key application, which is animal feed. Fish feed is, for example, taking a lot of resources. For every ton of fish meal that is fed to fish, so fish is being fed to fish again, we use 5 tons of fish from the ocean to feed this fish. And insect proteins, insect meals have a very similar composition, so they can be applied and literally save fresh fish out in the ocean. Insects have a very high functionality, so their amino acid profile is very good. They have a high digestibility, so they tick a lot of the boxes that make it a great alternative. And at the same time, they're very climate smart. So even compared to a lot of vegetable proteins, we're more efficient in terms of space, in terms of water, and in terms of emissions. So the upcycling of food waste is supported by a lot of other key factors that really make it competitive. So, but the title of this episode relates to urban spaces. So how does all this, how do insects, how do future innovations in the food space really relate to urban spaces? Well, when I came to Hong Kong to work there, I was really inspired by the dense urban place, and I really felt that this difference between me growing up in the country and then going to a very densely populated space to work, it really ignited a lot of ideas of how we can solve future food problems. But in the meantime, I think it has changed a little bit. We've seen through the COVID pandemic that the style of connecting with each other has inevitably changed. We can work from home more often. So it is really not black and white. There is in the future not a thing that is called, an urban space and a rural space only. Those places, they get more and more similar. They grow closer to each other. So those landscapes are really changing. That's what we see. We will have less space overall, but the way we use it is going to be different. So the working from home, as you all experience probably, has changed already quite a bit. So on the one hand, we see here, we had in the last episode, Paul Fabrega from Rooftop Republic. The urban spaces are becoming more green. We're going to use more of urban agriculture for applying it into urban spaces. The technology is getting more efficient. We need less space. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see a high-tech farm in Holland, in the rural countryside. So the rural places become more technologized. They become even more important to support infrastructure of the food system. So in the future, an urban space will be looking a bit more mixed in a rural space as well. So on this picture, it's probably getting closer to what we'll see in the future, a mixed use of agriculture, of outdoor space, and of residential area. And we see that we see these trends of more mixed uses and mix of technologies and variety in a lot of different areas. So in agriculture, for example, yesterday, in the past, we had mixed farming. So we used different kinds of farming practices and of tools to farm. That was a relatively healthy system. Today, we have a lot of monoculture. We really industrialized farming. And tomorrow, and that's already starting today, we'll have more AI-driven, technology-driven approaches that bring nature and technology and knowledge closer together. So we'll see more diversity, more informed diversity driven by data. And that also, we see the same trend, of course, in other industries, like in finance, where we see more decentralization as well, more technology and customers going to choose alternatives and decentralized systems. And we see that in the industry. So while previous methods of manufacturing were quite sturdy and required a lot of infrastructure, today we already have farms full of 3D printers that can be decentralized. So any computer in the world can send a file to a 3D printer, be it somewhere here in Vienna or somewhere in Hong Kong, and you can get your product printed. So there's decentralization happening there as well, and we'll see that more and more in the future of having more diversification and decentralization. That's also where we see, as Livin Farms, where we see the future of protein production going. We started out with the saying that this is the big phrase that we use over and over again. Einstein said you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking you used when you created it. And that's exactly true for what we need to be looking into. So how can we create, already starting at the home consumer, a system that is more resilient to avoid food shortages, to avoid problems in logistics that you see on the right-hand side. We all experienced that during the COVID pandemic. Shelves are being emptied, infrastructure collapses. Therefore, it becomes more important to, again, local systems that work and that can benefit the global economy because they work in a very small scale. So our approach was, how can we empower the home consumer? So we started out with designing a lot of different insect devices, Farm 432 on the left-hand side. So really small ecosystems that you could use in your home to feed your food waste in there and harvest proteins. That's Hive Home. And right now we as you might know, are primarily focused on education on the one hand. So our Hive Explorers that process food scraps in your home and that particularly teach young people about the methods to upcycle and to become more sustainable. So what can everybody, every single person do to make the system better? We really believe in the importance of education here. And on the other hand, we're working on industrial solutions. So primarily in Vienna, we are building a very large Hive Explorer, so to say. So we're scaling this up really in an industrial scale in order to make an impact in the food system itself. And what I pointed out before, there's all these different industry byproducts that are available, that are out there, and that we can utilize with the help of insects and technology to transform them into higher quality proteins and nutrients. And that's what we're aiming to do with our industrial technologies that are going to be applied at an industrial level, but at a scale that can already work with smaller industrial quantities in order to create more sustainable systems again. So if I have a few thousand tons of byproduct somewhere in a city or in an urban space or even rural space in the industry, I can already process it with the help of our technology. I can scale it up, but I can also stay at an industrial scale that is relatively small compared to large scale infrastructure that you would otherwise need in the industry out there today. So I'm at the end of my presentation here. The call to action to you out there is really to think of Pumuckl, maybe when you eat meat the next time, or when you buy something in the grocery store. Think to yourself, what can I do on an everyday level to make a difference and to become more sustainable? Be it buying more consciously, but particularly avoiding food waste. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Katharina. That was a great, insightful presentation, of course. And I've already seen some questions coming through, so I will address them very soon. I really liked it, and what I like about the series is that things always come in nicely together, and you can tell that all our speakers are going in the same direction at the end of the day. So connection with food seems to be kind of like the dominant theme. And I'm starting to think whether we should have called the series that way. It's a positive term, actually.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, but what I think was also interesting is that for the first time, we've also talked about how the rural landscape may be changing. We've focused quite a lot on urban landscapes and how we're all kind of converging there. So that's really nice and new insights. I think it's great to maybe start from our audience's questions first, so we can make sure to address them. I hope I'm not gonna mispronounce your names here, but we have I'm guessing it's a nickname, a Meister Lampe, asking a question and asking, I think it's a very good question, also considering that this episode comes after Paul's episode last week. How can we combine insect farming and plant-based farming?
Yeah, that's a very good insight. I think insects are particularly suitable to be part of circular systems. So what we see is we can integrate them into an existing food system, like for waste processing. For plant-based, I think one key aspect is the fertilizer, for example. So in insect farming, inevitably, there is waste, as there is in other livestock production, but the waste is really treasure in our sense. It is valuable nutrients for plants, for soil. It's valuable fertilizer that can be applied to farming other plants, and this is actually like one of the key link between the plant-based world and the animal world. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that aspect is really interesting, and we need to value food waste, because one of the misconceptions is that food waste is just waste, as in it's a pity not to use it, but actually having food waste out there also has environmental impacts, which we talked about in the previous episodes. So
absolutely, and upcycling nutrients. The energy stays, right. It goes over into other nutrients. So from waste you have insects, and from insects you have fertilizer that again becomes nutrients when absorbed by plant roots.
Yeah, and I think it's just amazing how insects, they're like such tiny creatures, but they're so powerful, right, in teaching this, in showing this circularity. So it's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
The next, it's not really a question, but it's more of a request. But I think it's worth addressing, because we hear that quite a bit. One of our audience members are asking, I would love to see the multi-tiered system for the home again, and that is the Hive Home, which Katharina showed you earlier. And I think it would be nice to share a little bit the story of the evolution from the Hive Home to the Hive Explorer and what we had in mind.
Yeah, so the Hive Home was really our first product to empower empower people in their homes to upcycle their food waste. What we saw when we shipped the product around the world was that a lot of our Livin Farms community has used the Hive Home not so much to produce food, of course, but even more so for educating others, for showing it to their neighbors, for showing it to their kids, and to really use it as a tool for educating about sustainability and everything that is connected to insects. So this box of worms, so to say, became much more than only about growing insects. And I think that was the key reason why we adapted our technology and launched the Hive Explorer, so that educators and people in our community would have a much easier entrance into starting to talk about insect farming and starting to see the miracle, really, of food waste conversion that is happening. It's small, it's compact, it's affordable, and that was a big reason why we went for it. But we are keeping our waiting lists open for a possible relaunch of Hive Home in the future. So stay tuned. But for now, Hive Explorer is the way to go. And it also gives you the benefits of insect farming in your home, plus the added curriculum and all the material that we also offer to really facilitate a structured conversation about education.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a reminder, I'm sure our colleague Savina can help us share that, but you can also download the free lessons and see what our education is about. And that really nicely ties in with how Katharina and the team designed the Hive Explorer for visibility and for transparency on how this process works. So awesome. Thanks, Katharina. I see other questions, so I'm just going to keep on reading them out loud because I think they're really interesting. We have a Bug Burger. The question just slid down. What is your take on the existing legislation? Which are the biggest hurdles to set up circular systems in the EU? That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a very good one. In the European, to give a bit of context for our viewers that are possibly not in the EU or not familiar with it, in the European Union, we are only allowed to feed insects feed that is feed standard. So if we can show that the feed is safe, feed, it's example is treated in a certain way, it is already a waste that we can legally feed to animals, to pigs and poultry as well. And that is what we can legally feed to insects as well. So insects are considered livestock at the end of the day in Europe. In other countries outside of Europe, it is possible to feed insects other types of waste that are not feed standard, possibly even manure we see in some countries is being fed to insects. So definitely there is a legislative hurdle in the EU that constrains us as an industry to push even further. But there are a lot of changes happening. So first of all, I think there are a lot of quantities in the industry out there today that are not recovered, but that are perfectly feed grade. That is one. And we see that in quantities around a few thousand tons of waste that occurs in food or feed industry that are often not recovered. They could, but they're not, because it's economically too much effort to process them. And for this, that's why we're working in this direction to offer technology to process even those small, it is industrial scale, but even those small amounts of food waste that they can be recovered. So that's one aspect to go for. The scale is important to recover substrates that we can already legally use. And then, of course, in the background, working on legislation that will open up a lot of different ways to use waste that maybe we can now not use. For example, in terms of organic wastes, if we can introduce strategies that make it safe, where we can show this is a safe product to feed, legislation is going to follow eventually.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, thank you. That was a really interesting one, of course, and thanks, Bugburger, to asking that question. So I'm aware that we are towards the end of this half an hour. So if any of you need to, just so you know, this webinar, basically episode, will be available on YouTube. So please do come back to our channel if you want to see what's going to happen in the next few minutes. I thought we might extend just a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, to ask our final question, Katharina, because this is something that we as a team as well experience quite a lot, right? When we talk to friends and families about the job that we have and what we do. And I think for the wider audience that might not be an expert quite yet on insect and insect farming, this is interesting. It is, of course, a kind of a tricky topic to introduce, right? It's not your typical water cooler kind of conversation in the office. We're talking about bugs and fertilizer, which is basically poop. And so it, at the very least, it raises some eyebrows, right? So what do you think gets people past that barrier and opens them up for discussing using these technologies in their everyday life, and then eventually also considering insects as edible, as food?
Yeah, I think insects have something very special. They're almost a love it or hate it topic. So when having a conversation about them, either people are fascinated or people are really grossed out. And I think that's actually a good thing. That means that it touches people, it intrigues people, and it's not a topic that no one cares about. So that's a good initial reaction, I think, whether it's good or bad. And then if there's a negative reaction to it, I think the importance is to demonstrate what insects can do as our allies for the food system. So education is a big part of that, educating people that insects are important already. So not even talking in industry terms, insects are out there in the ecosystem already, many of them. They're the largest biomass on the planet, and they're extremely important for pollinating plants, for actually making our world work. Without insects, we would be very, very not well off. So that's the first aspect. And for an industry standpoint, it is, and then also a home user standpoint, I think we need to think, how can we use these incredible things that insects are already doing out there in nature and use it to our advantage, instead of being afraid of or looking away. How can we utilize that? How can we use that? And that's what we do as Livin Farms. And also, of course, always talking about the topic in a friendly way, because that's what insects really are. They're not scary, they're really friendly. And I think our mealworms perfectly show that. If you look at them, it's very calming and they're really cute animals.
For sure, it can be very therapeutic to watch mealworms just go about their daily life, eating our leftovers, and yeah, we definitely find them cute. It just took some time.
Mealworm TV, that's still an idea. Yeah.
Exactly, a reality show for mealworms. Well, thank you so much, Katharina. This was great, and I want to thank our audience also for putting your questions through. If you have more questions, do not hesitate to drop them. Because of time concerns, we might just address them later and publish them in the video description. So before I go, I just want to remind you, our next episode next week is episode number 5 with Poonam Chopra. So do subscribe to the channel to get a reminder of when we're gonna go live. And for those of you that are following Misplaced, know that if you fill out our feedback form, which is in the description of the video on YouTube, you are eligible to win a 150 USD gift card for our website. And I believe my colleagues are also gonna publish, or they did, there you go, a discount, basically a cash discount you can use on our web shop. So once again, thank you so much, Katharina, and thank you to our audience. This was great. We're looking forward to the next episode.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the next episode too.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.